Hey everybody, I'm Katallina, and today we're talking about episode 4 of Unnamed Memory. Gotta be honest, I've had my eye on that blonde knight for a while and figured that she was going to cause trouble at some point. There are several reasons for this. She seemed to generally mistrust Tinasha to begin with. I also kind of got a vibe from her that she's had her eye on Oscar for a while, and the idea of Tinasha hanging around and Oscar constantly asking Tinasha to marry him makes it pretty obvious to me that at some point he's probably let that one slip while she's been in their presence, and I bet she doesn't like it one bit. Given the way she probably feels internally, I don't necessarily think on her own that she would have resorted to something like this, but I think it did make her more susceptible to the possibility of mind control, kind of like the idea of what happens to Golbez in Final Fantasy IV, where the line states that there was an evil in his heart that someone else could use. That kind of thing could really mess with somebody, and I think that it makes for an interesting thematic statement inside of a story where magic, and especially something like mind control, are present. I also think that it's interesting that thematically, this episode utilized the idea of different types of mind control or manipulation in several different ways as it went about telling the story, because the danger of influencing someone else's thoughts, actions, and decisions isn't merely about magic. It can just as easily be about manipulation or persuasion. I also think it's really sweet that we see Oscar comforting Tinasha during this scene, because it was really interesting to see how she reacted to the accusations, because they weren't anything illegal or dangerous or anything. They were basically the idea that Tinasha had swayed or tempted people into being interested in her. Now, it could be taken in a way to suggest that Tinasha would use some kind of magic or love spell to do that. But given how interested Oscar is in Tinasha, I'm sure he's not the only person to have ever harbored those kind of feelings toward her. And it's very possible that the root of the control that was taken over the night was definitely out of some kind of personal insecurity. But the really interesting thing about it, when we look at it from Tinasha's point of view, is when Oscar asks her, "When's the last time you cried?" Because Tinasha has lived for hundreds of years, and generally seems like she's somebody pretty practical and who has her stuff together. So it is likely that she doesn't break down often, and even the sequence that we saw didn't really show anything with like massive waterworks or anything. It was just very sweet with him hugging her and comforting her. And it was actually more so the fact that they needed the Witch of the Forest's help with the mind control, and that we find Tinasha resting and the Witch of the Forest coming to tell her that everything's taken care of, that showed me something was going on. I have vision problems. I didn't actually see tears. I didn't realize something was wrong until Oscar said something. So even in this moment of having all this stress and discomfort, she still generally did a decent job at keeping her composure. An interesting thought while we're talking about the possibility of the Witch of the Forest needing to take care of this problem is the fact that she said that the assistance will not come cheap. I wonder whether that will prove to be something that was said tongue-in-cheek, or whether there will actually be some kind of price or consequences down the line that Tinasha or Oscar, I'm not sure which, will actually have to pay. But given the kind of person that we've seen her to be in the past episode, she can be a bit of a trickster and a joker, but she can also be very dangerous, so it really could go either way. I quite liked Oscar and Tinasha's training montage, and I thought it was pretty interesting. I was worried there was something wrong with Oscar when he collapsed on her later on in the sequence, but it could just have been exhaustion. We'll have to see what happens going forward. I did think it was kind of a jerk move on her part to have him train against these people who had come in to do the challenge, given that she usually has specific tasks for those people, and that there was no way they were going to beat Oscar. I mean, she might as well have just told them to turn around and leave. But I mean, it did serve some purpose for him to have practice and everything, and she did assure him that she was going to heal them. One thing I did like was the training about learning about the fire and about how magic patterns work. That was quite interesting. And I think that that's probably going to be something very valuable to him going forward, especially with this underlying concept that she keeps thinking that he might need to take her out at some point, which ties to me back to the whole concept of mind control and manipulation. Is it that there is somebody who has some secret that might alter how she behaves or something because she's afraid of some kind of consequence? Or is it that somebody has some kind of magic that even she might not be able to resist? Something that could make her go in a direction she doesn't necessarily want to go? Or does somebody know something about her that might turn her new friends against her? There are lots of possibilities. One last thing that I will point out is that we didn't see any signs of hot but evil from the last episode, and given that we're dealing with a country ruled by mages, I would be pretty surprised if he wasn't somehow involved in that, whether directly or indirectly. He's definitely someone I think we're going to see again, so I certainly want to keep him in mind, even if the show is trying to kind of backpedal a little bit and keep him in the shadows. Another interesting thought is the reality that we find out that Oscar has the potential to use magic. He would need to give up the sword that he's using in order to do that, but it's definitely an interesting thought. The closer he gets to Tinasha, I wonder how much more he'll waver on wanting to use that weapon. And now that we know that mind control is a thing in this story world, how much more likely could it be that he'll need that and that he might actually need to fight her for real if something happens that alters her mind or her thoughts? I mean, that's a pretty scary consequence, especially given that this man has spent all of this time, and at this point in the story we find out that they've been together nearly 6 months. He's been spending a good chunk of time within a human context with her, and to suddenly have something happen where he might actually need to do real harm, that would be a really shocking thing for him, I'm sure. One thing that keeps coming up when I read stuff about this series in comments and that sort of thing, like on Crunchyroll and stuff, is the reality that a lot of people who have read the source material are talking about the fact that the pacing in this is very off and that there are a lot of things that are missing. And most of the time I haven't had too much trouble following this story, but one thing that did kind of throw me off with its impact was the way that people were reacting to this general's death near the end of the episode. Now, I mean, anyone's death deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, so that aspect didn't surprise me. But the fact that we're spotlighting and highlighting this character's death when, as far as I know, we haven't actually met him at any point during the story directly up until this sequence, was kind of confusing, because when I first heard that a general had died, I thought it was the red-haired guy that Tinasha trained with in one of the previous episodes, and I'm like, oh, that's sad. And then I find out it's this elderly guy who was actually Oscar's sword teacher and who is somehow connected to a maid that Tinasha spoke to one-on-one earlier in the episode, and clearly knew something about the character and has some insight in what's going on with her, but didn't seem to want to go further on that in any way at that point. So that was definitely okay, this must be important for some reason, but I'm definitely missing context kind of deal, which was kind of strange. The ending scene with the maid actually revealing that she has some kind of powers and some kind of ulterior connection, and then going about killing the man that came to see Tinasha earlier in the episode from the Mage Kingdom, was pretty interesting. I wonder who she actually is and what her deal is. We did get some indication that she knew the general. I wonder whether this man was responsible for that person's death and whether she was avenging them, or whether something else is going on here and that I'm kind of leaping to conclusions. Either way, I hope that we get more information on this Mage Kingdom and on who this woman is and what she's up to in the next episode, because to me, at present, those and the lingering concerns over hot but evil are the things that are holding the most of my interest at this point. Of course, I do care about the growing relationship between Oscar and Tinasha, but that's obvious. And it's other plot things that are going to move it forward and that are going to create situations where we are going to see what's happening between them be grown and be tested. So that's very important. Anyway, overall, I thought this was a pretty solid episode. I genuinely enjoyed it. I felt very bad for the knight who had the mind control put on her, because regardless of what's going on in her personal life, it was still tragic to see somebody go through that. Anything that takes away somebody's free will is generally not a good thing and not something you want kicking around. It was funny seeing the Witch of the Forest again. I love her design, and she's generally a fun character. So that was pretty cool. And I thought it was very sweet seeing Oscar comfort Tinasha, and I like seeing those kinds of moments between them. So what did you guys think of this episode? Was there anything in particular that stood out to you or that you would have changed or different? I'd love to know, so feel free to leave a comment below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!